Several months ago, I approached Susan Fitzgerald Rice about giving a talk to our Rotary about philanthropy. Winnipesaukee definition of philanthropy is love of mankind, which is kind of general. I define it a little more specifically as a private decision or private decisions to give of one's time, talent, and treasure to a good cause. Susan Fitzgerald and I go way back to Evanston, Illinois. That should be a town you guys should recognize.
Sure.
Evanston, Illinois in the 1940s and 1950s. As we know, Rotary International is headquartered in Evanston, Illinois. Susan and I lived 3 blocks apart. We went to the same parochial school, St. Athanasius Parish. My sister, Sheila, who I was hopeful to be on today, but she's not, and Susan went to the all-girls Catholic high school there, whereas I went on to the all-boys Jesuit high school there. And then Susan went to college at St. Mary's of Notre Dame, which is kind of the sister school of Notre Dame University, where she met her future husband there. He went to Notre Dame University. And I stayed in Chicago for college, went to Loyola University, and then the University of Chicago. And then, surprisingly enough, Susan and Don ended up in West LA as I did. We didn't know we were going to be out there, but we reconnected through our local parish, Catholic parish, St. Paul the Apostle in Westwood. Now, academically, Susan, as I said, graduated from St. Mary's College of Notre Dame, and then she got a master's in public administration from UCLA and a PhD in education. I said public education, public administration from UCLA, and a PhD in education from Pepperdine. Besides raising 3 boys, Susan has gone on to many accomplishments. She became a certified and an advanced certified fundraising executive, started her own firm where she is still active with this successive firm where she sold her business called Brakely Briscoe. She's the former president and CEO of the Greater Los Angeles Zoo Association. She was formerly she worked as the development director of the Anderson School of Management at UCLA. She was formerly on the board of the UCLA Foundation. She won the President's Medal of Freedom at St. Mary's College, where she went to school, and she was a member and the vice chairman of the Board of Trustees. Her husband, I was going to say right now, it's obvious Susan knows how to say yes and to give back. Her husband, Donald Rice, has his share of accomplishments also. He was the president and the CEO of the RAND Corporation, which is a well-known global think tank headquartered in Santa Monica. And he was the secretary of the U.S. Air Force under George Herbert Walker Bush. That's a cabinet position. He's been on many corporate boards, including Chevron and Amgen. And he founded 3 biotech companies. I'm out of breath now with these 2 people. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning again, well, before we start our dialogue. I asked Susan to speak about philanthropy, and she, knowing my background and interest, suggested that she and I have a little dialogue about this topic with the hope of generating some interest in philanthropy and perhaps even some philanthropists in our audience today. So, since it's time for you to get for us to get our dialogue going, Susan, why don't you get started?
Okay, I think our topic is like we'll be preaching to the choir. I know Rotarians are givers, they want to give back, and I heard it today. So what we're hoping to do is to talk about how we grew up and what we learned from our families, and then how we have expanded on this by being volunteers and in my case, also a staff and a consultant. So John mentioned his father just a few minutes ago, and I have very fond memories of him, as well as John's sister Sheila and brothers Dennis, Paul, and Philip. They lived, as John said, very close to us, and our fathers were very active in a number of activities. John's father more than mine, but both of them in particular were active at St. Athanasius was just too long a word, and at St. Vincent de Paul. I have a story to tell about my father in Santa Monica, and then I'll ask John some questions. But one of the examples that I learned later in life, but still young compared to what I am now, we lived in Santa Monica, and we were going to a fundraising afternoon reception at a beautiful home on La Mesa Drive, and my parents were visiting, so they came with us. And my father bought a dozen drink tickets. And I said, Dad, what are you doing? We're not going to be drinking. We'll each have maybe one drink. And he said, it's a fundraiser, Susan. So of course I'm going to do that. All of the money will go to the good charity. And to me, that's an example of being philanthropic, giving back, and getting in tune all the time about giving. So, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about, you mentioned your father. Why don't you talk about how when you moved from Chicago to LA, you worked for Smith Barney, but you immediately got started in doing volunteer work and then fundraising. Why don't you talk about that? And then I'll talk a little bit about myself.
Good, thank you. I went to the University of Chicago and then got a job on Wall Street with a firm that's no longer in business, and they for training, and then they sent me to the West Coast, and I arrived in LA before a quick year and a half in San Francisco to work for this firm in Los Angeles. I didn't know one person when I moved to LA. I wasn't married. I'd never met my future wife, but my schools, particularly University of Chicago, had a development office in Los Angeles to contact and keep in touch with their alumni. And somehow they got my name and called me up and said, you know, you're new in town here. Why don't you come and join us as a volunteer, and you'll meet a lot of people that way. And I said, well, I'll give it a try. I know I had some experience from observing my dad in philanthropy. I knew they were going to have me call people up and ask for donations for the university, but I was happy to do that. And it gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people. We had two trustees in LA who were big shots, the president of United California Bank, for example, whose name I forget now, Susan. But anyway, that's how I got to know a lot of people and got started in doing it in Los Angeles. And then after we got married at St. Paul's, the pastor there asked me one time to help him out with a little campaign to build a pavilion in the back of our school playground. And I helped him out with that. And that went on to something else, to put a new roof on the John Carroll Center over there. And I helped with that. So I was really doing this now as a volunteer and learning as I was doing. Okay, now, can I ask Susan some things? Susan, about your dad, your dad, Joe Fitzgerald, I remember him well. What about your dad? I know you mentioned one thing about the drink tickets, but what else might have inspired you from your dad or your mother or your family to get into this business?
Well, they were both givers. They both gave back to the community. I remember my mother, she was doing fundraising by being in a bridge group, and there were a whole lot of different bridge groups, and she couldn't type. So she drew a graph and a chart and then asked me to type it. And because it showed which couple, which person played with who each week. So, and then every week, of course, it brought in money. So just that, the knowledge that they gave at church. And I know that that's what's happening with everybody here. You gave to church or your synagogue, you gave back. When somebody came to your door and asked you for help, you did that. You buy candy when someone says it because it's going to help. children. And that's what I saw in my father. When we moved here and I got involved at St. Paul's, I was on the finance council and the parish council. I did many other things as a volunteer, including giving back to the League of Women Voters. And as John said, it's time, talent, and treasure.
Yeah.
But what both John and I think, and we know that you do too, is that it isn't just giving your time and your talent, it's your treasure. And to be able to turn it over to somebody else to spend as they think best for the mission of the organization is an extraordinary step. And once you get there, it's really easy to ask others to join me in giving. So that's kind of how I got into it as a volunteer. And after a certain point, when our kids were teenagers, I thought, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? What have I done? I've done governmental relations and I've done fundraising on a small level. Fortunately, UCLA hired me. I worked there, and then eventually I went into consulting after heading the Zoo Association and Business Executives for National Security in Washington, D.C. And I started with my own business in the 80s or the 90s after the Zoo, and then I joined Brakely Briscoe. And my role now is as a consultant. And I usually advise, when we work with the client, we usually advise people, the staff, how to help volunteers make it easy for them to ask.
Yeah.
So, John, do you want to talk about what you like about asking? And then I'll talk about what I see a staff person do and what you, as a Rotarian, if you're on a board, what you can expect a staff person to assist you with.
One thing I wish you would clear up for a lot of us,
Yeah.
Susan, is that as a consultant, you really didn't ask for money very often, did you? You trained other people. Isn't that kind of it?
Yes. When I was an employee at UCLA, I could do that. As a consultant, I'm not a consultant that goes out and asks, as you would find in the political fundraising field. In the philanthropic fundraising field, we assist a board member or an annual giving person to have the right background so that they know who they're going to ask. They know why that person will probably say yes. We can provide that background for them. We can give them a couple tips on what to say. Do you want me to go into those tips now?
Yeah, you can go into a couple of those tips. Yes, that's good.
Okay. I was telling John that what I like to say is, if you could just remember the word TANS, T as in Tom, A as in Adelphi, N as in Nancy, S as in steps. But what they stand for is thank, ask, next steps. So when you go in to see someone, you always want to start with thanking them for seeing you, thanking them for their previous gift, thanking them for whatever else you know about them, because the staff person with your organization has already given you some background, or even better, you already know the person, but you want to thank them. The second A, guess what, is ask. And the reason it's second is that it's really important to have time after you've thanked them and after you've asked them for money, that you give them time to talk about why they care about the organization that you're talking with them about. And God forbid, if they say no, it gives you an opportunity to ask them, what is it about the organization that appeals to you? And why are you saying no now? Because for me, anytime I hear a no, it means no, not right now. It doesn't mean no, never. It means this isn't the right timing. I've just made 3 other commitments, or I've just paid for grandson's tuition, or whatever. So if you ask in the early part of your meeting, because usually it's no more than a half hour, you still have an opportunity to talk about next steps. So think, ask, and next steps, because the next steps If they say yes, they'll give just like that, no matter what you ask. And John can talk about how important it is, he thinks, to ask for a particular gift. But if they just say yes, you want to know, when are they going to give? Because unless you see them pull out the checkbook, they haven't given you the gift yet. They're saying they're going to. And so you want to make sure you have time to say, do you want to handle it this month? Do you want to send a reminder? Do you need a pledge form? Do you want to do it in installments? And if you are accompanied by a staff person, that person can do that too. And in fact, if a staff person does join you, they can talk about the mission. They can give you the data that the prospective donor might ask. But you can say, I've made a gift. I stretched. This is one of my favorite charities. I hope you'll join me. So John, I want you to give a couple tips about, hey, there's Sheila.
Okay.
Say
One
hi.
thing I know, Susan spoke about, getting in front of the potential donor. One thing, and I'm going to now move up to the area that I call major gifts. Major gifts could be a frightening term to people. You think like millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Major gifts is a relative term. I'm on the board now in West LA, the West LA Homeless Board, and our president spoke to our Rotary Club summer of 20, and in that we're just getting started there. A major gift for them is $5,000. That could be coin money for some people. You know what I mean? If you were asked Tom Barron what's a major gift for Santa Clara, I guess it would be $250,000 or more, I would think. But it's going to be a lot bigger than $5,000 to the West LA homeless. You see what I mean? Another thing I talk about is when you want to make an ask, you've got to get in front of the person. You can't do it on the phone, can't do it with a letter. You got to get in front of them. And sometimes that's very difficult. And sometimes you almost have to give up on it, as I have on some occasions. But some way, I mean, I've used various ruses to do it. Offering to take someone to a really, really nice restaurant. Sometimes that works, believe it or not. I would get people to go to Spago who wouldn't see me otherwise. Spago in Beverly Hills on Cannon Drive. They knew they were going to get a real nice fancy meal, so they might accept. But things like that. And then Susan referred to this earlier, when they've been cultivated, and you can't make an ask the first visit, obviously, but when they've been cultivated, and when they've been cultivated, they'll know they're ready. They'll know that you're ready to ask them. Also, you got to ask them for a specific amount. You got to, and you may have a bum idea, and I've over asked a couple times. Thank God I've never under asked. If you under ask, someone accepts immediately, then you know you should have asked for a little more. But if you over ask, normally they don't get offended. In fact, very often they're pleased about it. They think, oh God, he really thinks I'm that rich. But so anyway, you've got to ask for a specific amount. Very important. Another thing I was going to say is I have found it, and most people abhor the thought of having to ask someone for money, but I really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. It's fun in many ways. I call it kind of a spiritual time. If you get someone to make a stretch gift, and a stretch gift for someone could even be $1,000, you normally see someone who is very, very happy with themselves. I mean, I think it's one of the happiest times of your life and of my life when I make a nice gift. And I think many of you might have experienced that, you know. I got one more point, and then I want Susan to come back here. We had a pastor at St. Paul's about 20 years ago named Father Bob Rivers.
Father Bob.
You knew him, Father Bob. Father Bob was a pretty aggressive pastor. I know he offended one very good friend of mine, a movie star, who don't usually like to give money, and they usually don't give money very much. But he offended this guy so much that he dropped out of our parish. I won't tell you his name, but he's a name everybody knows here. But Father Rivers came up with a concept. You know, we've always heard the old saw is you give until it hurts. Father Rivers carried it one more step further, like the second derivative. You give until it feels good. And that's a fact. After a while, if you get used to giving, you're going to find it's a very pleasurable experience. Susan, I'd like to hear some more of your tips, more of your comments, please.
Make it louder.
Okay, I have two more. I want to build on what John was saying about how wonderful it is to feel after you've decided to give a gift. And that's another good reason to be sure that you have enough time in your meeting for the next steps after you do the ask. Because you give the opportunity to the person who you're asking the chance to think about, oh my gosh, what have I done? How am I going to see this happen? What's going to happen to the organization because of my gift? How can I be involved? They get an opportunity to relish the fact that they've really done it. And I didn't get to this, so I'm going to now. If they do say no, that's when you can ask, would it be a good time for me to come in 6 months? Would you like to have a callback? Do you want to meet with someone else with the organization to hear what they're doing? May we invite you to an event? So you are able to continue the conversation, and you never know whether they will be ready and willing to give at another time. Remember, they agreed to meet with you. And if they really didn't want to give, they would tell you over the phone or by email saying, you know what, this isn't for me. In fact, sometimes I've said that, but sometimes I haven't as a volunteer. The other thing I would like to mention is that if you do go on a board, and I suspect most of you have been on a board at one point or another, I know Tom Barron, and I suspect some of the others here are like Tom and John, serving and being on the board and giving. When you go on the board, you're an investor. Whether it's a public board and you're investing and you bought stock, or whether it's a charitable board, you're investing in that organization. You're investing in your time and your talent, but they need your treasure. And you need to be able to say that you've given, and it's a high priority, charitable priority. And furthermore, the organization can then say, when they're seeking grants from foundations, we have 100% giving from our board, which is an extraordinary commitment for a foundation to hear. And they often will not give if the board itself is not committed. So when you say, yes, I care about this mission, yes, I want to go on the board, then, and undoubtedly you've already been a giver. But if you're not, then I hope that you will think about how important it is to give back. I know, as I've said, that many of you are givers, and you've had experiences, good experiences and bad experiences with asking for money. John, you want to talk about a good one or a bad one before we open it up for questions or comments?
I want to make two more points that I thought about.
Okay.
The difficulty in getting to see people, and yet this is where your imagination comes in, or maybe the art form of how to get to see somebody who doesn't want to see you because they know you may be asking for a gift. But I always use in my mind, I keep this New Yorker cartoon in my mind. There's a picture of a fellow on the phone, and he's getting a call from someone who wants to see him for one reason or another. And he says to the guy on the phone, he says, no, Tuesday won't work for me. How does never work? And that's kind of the response you get sometimes. The other thing, as you get further along and you've seen someone and you realize he could be a giver and he's letting you into the thought that he's willing to see you, and he could be a giver, you go through this process called cultivation. And one thing that I always remember and helps me somewhat is if you get the person involved in your project, in your organization, not even to the board level, but somehow involved, I think your possibility of getting a gift from him is much greater. we call that money follows mission. And I think it works that way. And the last point I'm going to make before we can go into questions maybe is, you know, we hear about all the large fortunes that are going to be left to the next generation of children nowadays, you know, and not to say that's going to happen to us, but I think it's important to try to educate our children and how to give. Because if you don't learn at the family level, it's often very hard to learn how to give. I've known people who have done very, very well in their financial lives, but they never learned how to give, and very often they can't give. You just can't get them around to it. But anyway, we've done something with our family, which I suggest is maybe a good idea to consider. Every year, we have 4 children. They live in all across the country. Every year, we give our children a little bit of money for giving. It's not money that they can spend. They can only use it to give it away. We usually do that in early December. And then at Christmas time, we'll have a family meeting on Zoom or wherever it's going to be. And everybody will tell us where they're giving their money. I've always told the kids, if I were you, but it's your money to give now, wherever you want to give it, I would give some locally. So most of them do give money in Brooklyn and St. Louis and places. I think that's a good idea. I would suggest that. Give your kids a little bit of money to give, not to spend, to give. I think, Susan, we were hopeful of getting some comments from people or questions or things you don't agree with or don't understand or don't like, or, okay, let's go.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yes.
Um,
Mark
I'll
has a
just share
question.
with you, I have to quickly go to a showing, but real quickly, I'll share with you what I do, John, which is very similar to what you do. I am sick and tired in the month of December, many years ago. It's my birthday, it's Hanukkah, it's my mother's birthday, it was my father's birthday, and everybody's getting gifts that they don't need and they don't want. So 2 decades ago, we made a deal, everybody in the family, everybody gets a turn to pick a charity, and everybody else in the family makes a donation to that charity that year instead of giving crap to all of us that we all don't need. And it also helps the children and grandchildren to get into the habit of making donations as a part of their budget, of getting in it and accepting it as a ritual that they should do on a regular basis. And that's what was helpful to me. I've found that to be very successful. Now, 20 years later, that annual choice, whatever it is, whoever the recipient is, ends up getting a great legacy from our family because everybody donates to them.
That's really nice, Mark.
That's a great
Taking a
idea.
turn.
Tom,
among
you got to
everybody.
unmute.
Yes, I have a question for Susan. Susan, I want to go back to what you said about no, not right now. We're inundated with requests for charities all the time. I mean, we know that. Everyone here is probably that same way. But before you go into visit somebody or ask even on the phone or whatever to meet, it seems to me that you have to have an interest in that organization. There's no question. If the person doesn't have an interest, and we hit somebody will ask me for money for a particular organization, which I'm not concerned about or don't want to give, you know, it's tough to say, no, I don't want to give. Therefore, as a giver, you must research whether that person is really interested in that organization or charity of selection.
Right.
How do you do that? You have to do more research than just meet with them and ask.
Well, you know, there's an awful lot that's public. And so, in fact, there's a profession called prospect researchers, and they have a very high standard of ethics. But all political contributions are public, and that is one indicator. And then most organizations list donors, as you know. They have an annual report and they list all the donors in according to ranges, not the specific amount, but they'll say 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, above 25,000, and so on. So, for instance, if they have given to something that is Catholic, you've got an indication that they might be interested in giving to the Paulist Fathers or to the homeless that's connected to St. Paul's or something at St. Monica's. Or if they are very active in higher education, you can find the records, at UCLA, USC, Pepperdine, Notre Dame, whatever. And you have an understanding that they're interested in higher education. It's doubtful that they'd be interested in giving to Nashville because they don't seem to have a connection. So you may not even want to bother them with that, but it wouldn't hurt to ask them about their interest in higher education and what is appeal to them. But I agree with you, Tom. You need to do some homework, because if you're asking your friends, oftentimes they will say that they will meet with you, even though they're going to say no. I have learned not to do that. John knows once or twice he's asked me for money or to come to some event, and I've said, "Oh, John, it's just not my interest," hoping that I'm not going to lose his friendship, but I'd rather do it then than later. I don't know if that really answers your question, Tom, but there is a lot of research and available information about people that you can get indicators. You hire a prospect research firm, you're spending a lot of money for them to do in-depth research. And for a first or second ask, you don't need to spend the money to have in-depth research. You just want to know things that you could probably find out yourself Googling, but they could do it and not charge quite as much.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for the two of you. How do you address both spouses? Maybe one is particularly more enthusiastic and one is a little hesitant. And if it's a significant donation, it seems to me, I'm a CPA and I know what money does to people. I've seen it during my entire career. So a gift of this magnitude, I would imagine you must have some stories to share with us.
I'll go first because I'm a Democrat and my husband's a Republican. So we've had to sort things out over time. But we did agree right after we graduated from college that we would give equally. And as time has gone on, I have found it extraordinary how many St. Mary's women will, with their husbands, give $5 million to Notre Dame and $5,000 to St. Mary's. Because there wasn't that commitment that fortunately Don and I had both agreed on. So in the early years, we were giving $15 to each one, and it grew. And then, there's the giving levels, 1,000, and then it's 2,500. And each time, in fact, Don has told Notre Dame a couple times, when you're asking me for that, you're really asking us to give double because we're going to give to St. Mary's at the same amount. And then from time to time, there's a particular building that needs to be built right away at one institution and not the other. So then you make that commitment, but you're remembering that you're going to do more later. So then you cut back. I've seen it at UCLA. In fact, what started a volunteer group called Women in Philanthropy was the result of some women giving to UCLA, but it was always in their husband's name. And no one knew the name of the wife. This was 25 years ago, so it was a little different then. And no women were on advisory boards. And the women came together and said, UCLA, would you work to keep us getting together from time to time? And as a result, women have been recognized for the community gift that both of them had given, as well as discovering that they had some interests like in archaeology rather than athletics, or art instead of business school, or I know I'm placing people in categories because there's a lot of women who care about sports and actually in terms of basketball at UCLA with Coach Close. Anyway, John, I don't know if you want to address this as well, but it can be tricky. I agree with you, Chris.
I would. And by the way, I think that's very enlightened of you and Don to have made that deal.
I think sometimes he's regretted it. I don't know.
Patty and I haven't really made that deal, but we kind of tried to anyway. But what used to really bother me Tom Barron and I were on the board of Marymount High School for quite a while, or our girls went to school. And I always got dragged into development when I got on these boards. So I was kind of the board development guy. I was calling on a lot of alumni of Marymount who lived in Brentwood or Westwood or Beverly Hills and nice homes. You know, they were doing well. Some of them had careers. Many of them were just housewives, had raised their families, and they were giving meager amounts to Marymount. And I know their husbands very often who had gone to Loyola High were giving much bigger amounts to their schools. And that's a tough one. You got to get the wife to go after her husband to get that kind of gift. And that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, you know what I mean? That's one point. Another one is, I shouldn't talk on my wife out of school, but I mean, University of Chicago and Loyola of Chicago have been after me for years. Every year, every time somebody comes out, they call me for lunch, this and that. Patty went to Long Beach State, and they've never bothered her too much for gifts. And guess what? Guess who gets the money? The one who asked.
Right.
Chicago and Loyola get the money, and Long Beach State doesn't get much because Patty never asked me for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Any
Hey,
other?
before we conclude, Phil Gabriel, I don't see you. Are you still here?
Oh, yes.
Does anyone see Phil?
Oh, Sheila,
No.
my sister's on the phone now.
No, I'm on, but I don't think Phil is. Sorry.
Right, well,
My sister. There's
It's-
Sheila. There's
yeah.
Sheila, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
yeah, Phil's birthday is today, so I
Sheila.
wanted to wish him a happy birthday, but apparently he's no longer on. So if there's any other questions for,
I have one.
go ahead, Tom.
Susan, a lot of organizations, public organizations we give to, I'm always interested in how the general administrative expense ratio is, because so many organizations, you know, they have 60% administrative, so very little goes to the actual fund or charity, I mean. So therefore, what's an average acceptable amount for G&A type of percentage?
Oh, I'm so glad you raised that, because there's been, to me, it's almost a myth that you can judge an organization by the small amount of money that they spend on fundraising. But if they spend a small amount on fundraising, they're not going to get as much back. And in some years, they have to spend a lot because they're doing some planning, new branding, new marketing. They're building, doing architectural plans for a building, but they're not ready to fundraise for it. I would agree with you, Tom, that if it's at 50 and 60% year after year after year, you wonder, well, so are they ever serving the underserved or not? But the standard that I have heard, I think is way too low, and it isn't a good guide, and that's 10 to 15%. Because there are too many things that happen in different years that adjust that, and you need to look over the long term, not just, I can see John wants to say something.
Yeah. I have one comment. There was a board I was on, an organization in Pacoima that helps the poor up there in that area of the San Fernando Valley. They spent 8% on fundraising. It was way too low. They weren't getting value at all. They didn't have enough people. They weren't able to do a good job. That was way too low. I don't know what the right number is, but I think I would agree with what Susan was saying. 15%, 20% is probably okay. Many of these phone fundraisers who call us for good causes, I'll ask them and they'll tell me 10% goes to the charity. I say, thanks, I can't give to that kind of a ratio.
Right.
I'd like to make one comment. Both my wife and I have raised money for our college since we met in college. And one of the items or conditions is to be persistent. And my wife, over the years, and this is going back many years, was very persistent with a particular donor that lived, maybe a mile from where we lived. And she kept after him, and he finally gave a contribution. And the amount of contribution he gave was $35 million. And that, to me, is a success story.
Good. That's good. Those stories do occur. I did work for Loyola for a while, and we had a doctor in Chico, California, which isn't the richest town in the state by any means. He was giving us $1,000 a year, which is a good target for someone who's going to give you something. He gave me $1 million.
Wow. Any other questions? Any other comments?
I think we ought to extend this for another half hour. No, I'm just kidding.
All right. Well, on behalf of the club, thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you added a lot of clarity to an area that a lot of us don't really participate in as much as we possibly should. So in your honor, both of you, a donation will be made to the Westwood Village Library, and we thank you very much. And next week, I want to bring to your attention, Steve Day will be running the meeting. And the past presidents will continue alternating until Nancy is fully recovered. So Marcia, I'll turn it back to you and we can say goodbye to all of us.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to say, Tom had mentioned about what Rotary is doing for Haiti. And if you guys look in the chat, I put a link that I found on the website, and it talks about what Rotary is doing there. They're real active with Shelter Box on the ground in Haiti, and water and sanitation in Haiti. And Rotary clubs are doing taking other actions in regards to the earthquake that was there. So Rotary is doing some things, and I put the link that you can go to the Rotary website in the chat box. And other than that, we'll be on the same Zoom number. I'll send out more invitations next week, but otherwise we'll see you same time, same place, Zoom connection next Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you for